health and social care. Today, we want to explore how we can use storytelling to be better leaders. How can stories inspire people and even motivate ourselves? A couple of housekeeping bits, please, just so I think everyone has done this. Mic's off because there's so many of us. I can see 74 already, which is fantastic. And we are recording this, so be aware. I'm your chair for today. My name is Andrew Burridge. Good morning. Feel free to put your name and your role in the chat and say hello. I think a lot of people are doing that, which is great to see. I am a program manager for Northwest ADAS, which is the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services. So we're Adult Social Care. Our organisation supports the region's 24 directors. We have a programme of set-led improvement. We do things like peer reviews we will organise, and a whole range of regional networks like commissioners and PSWs. And so on. And my own role tends to focus on commissioning and workforce. Now, I'm really excited about today because we've started to do some work around storytelling and develop our expertise in the program office. We'll cover some of this in the second half. So that means hopefully I'll learn quite a lot from you about how this stuff is received, in addition to what we can learn from Will today, who I will introduce shortly. But firstly, let me just tell you a bit about the Masterclass Collaborative. I think many of us are attending these regularly now, so you will hopefully know what this is, but I'll just introduce the organisations that make up the collaborative, who are MIAA, Aqua, Northwest Leadership Academy, Northwest Employers, and finally ourselves. And my version of how the collaborative came about is a few years ago. I was sat in a room with Northwest Employers, and I overheard a couple of organisations booking the same speaker in the same week. One of them was charging, and I had a real moment of like, come on, we surely can start talking to each other. And that came, that's developed and developed. So we're really proud with the partnership that we've got, and it helps us provide great value and engage speakers like Will Storr and John Amieci, and Madeline Bunting was another great one that we, as Northwest ADAS, we probably wouldn't be able to organise. But most importantly, I'd say this is space and time for leaders across organisations and sectors across the whole region to come together and think about really interesting things and learn. And we think that is very important. There's not too much more of me before I hand over to Will, but I just want to say a little bit more. We proposed a masterclass about storytelling because we've been increasingly thinking this is really important for leaders. We think stories are one of the fundamental tools that we actually use to communicate with each other, right? And it begs the question, what's a story compared to like an account or a report or an email? But from our perspective, this is basically leaders need to influence the thinking and the actions of others. Leaders need relationships, need to build and maintain relationships. And that's like probably the most simple explanation of leadership you can have. The narratives and stories, they help because they're the tools that create those connections in a way that even the best written data report possibly isn't going to. Stories speak to our hearts as well as our heads, and they connect with things that really matter to us. So the work we've done in the region, I have here Will Storr's book. We've used and found inspirational. We think it's a fantastic book. It's a mixture of science about neuroscience and the human experience mixed with an explanation of books and films that people love asking, why is it that people respond to this stuff? One point on the agenda to just note, you hopefully had in the email to prepare for this, we wanted to include a little bit of time for people to have a go. So after we've listened and asked questions of Will, you see at 10:50 there's a task in there. Over the break, we'll give you a bit of some tips and tools. We want people to have a go, and then later at 11:25, that's an opportunity to try and share a story if you've made some progress with it, or just reflect on what you've heard. So that is the end of my introduction. So if you're all sitting comfortably, can I introduce Will Storr? Will is an author and journalist with books exploring self-obsession and stealthy culture, status and social position. I think now 2 books on storytelling. As I say, we've drawn on Will's book to develop some of our own training, so we're very pleased to have Will today. So Will, you're there, aren't you?
Hi,
Hello,
yeah,
Will.
hi. Thank you for that introduction, Andrew. It's great to be here.
Can I just good morning? I'll just say to people, please put any questions in the chat. I'll take a note and I'll try to get people to introduce themselves and their questions when we get to the end. And if not, I'll ask the question on your behalf. So just a good morning, Will. How are you this morning?
Yeah, I'm great, thanks. How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm good. Well, over to you then. Do you want to
Yeah,
embellish the
let's kick
introduction I've
off.
given and then over to your slides?
All righty. Let me just
I'll stop sharing my
share
screen.
this. All right. So can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, great. All right. So welcome to the Science of Storytelling. I'm just doing quite a brief masterclass this morning on storytelling. Um, this whole kind of concept of the science of storytelling is really based around this kind of one central kind of observation, which is made by the very famous American psychologist, Professor Jonathan Haidt, who says that the human mind is a story processor, not a logic processor. So just over the next sort of 45 minutes, I'm going to be going through some sort of very basic principles of, storytelling. Andrew was saying, what is the difference between a story and maybe an anecdote or an account? So hopefully by the end of this this session, you'll have a clearer idea. And as I say, it's all based on this kind of core idea that stories come from human minds. Stories weren't something that were invented in Shakespeare's time or some genius up in a garret with a quill. Story is what human minds do. So my argument is that in order to understand how to tell stories better and understand what a story is, it's a good idea to understand the human mind a bit more and understand how and why the human beings became such kind of obsessive storytelling animals. And so I'm going to begin our journey by going really far back to the very, very roots of storytelling. And that is with this kind of really extraordinary idea from the realm of evolutionary psychology that the reason that human beings have language in the first place, the reason that we evolve language, is to allow us to gossip. Now that sounds like a really weird thing because we tend to sort of look down our noses at people who gossip and judge them negatively, and we think of gossip as kind of silly and a bit fatuous. But actually, gossip is essential to thriving human life, as we're going to discover. The first clue that it's really important is that it happens automatically. So almost as soon as young children can speak in full sentences, they are using them to report their behavior of other people, especially siblings or peers. So kids tell tittle tattle tales, don't they, on their brothers and sisters and friends. It happens automatically. We don't have to be taught to do this. It just happens, and it happens straight away. As soon as we're able to, we start telling stories about other people. And another kind of line of evidence is just how much of our time we spend gossiping. So humans spend about 65% of their conversation time talking about the good and bad deeds of others. That is gossiping. What's more, it's not just that people can gossip. Gossip seems to happen automatically. So this is cross-cultural, cross-gender. This is a universal behavior, which kind of begs the question, why? Why do we gossip so much? The reason that we gossip is that gossip is how humans became very, very groupish. So human beings are a species of ape. We're not like an ape. We are an ape. We're one of 5 existing species of great ape. But obviously, we're very unlike the other apes, and we're unlike the other apes in the sense that we're very, very cooperative. We're very groupish. We're kind of part ape, part ant, really. The other apes, even though they live in troops, they go about the business of survival as individuals, pretty much. But humans are amazing at cooperating. We gather into groups. Everybody plays their role in the groups and knows their role in the groups, and it's the groups that achieve what needs to be achieved, and that's human life. So that's everything from a football team to the NHS to a political party to an economy to a society. It's the groups. It's the groups that make human beings so incredibly successful. And gossip allows those groups to function. So gossip is the invention of the concept of a hero and a villain. And when we tell gossipy stories about somebody doing something good, we feel a great admiration for the person doing something good, and we award them with status and attention and all those lovely things. And likewise, when we tell gossip about somebody doing something bad, we experience the very powerful emotion of moral outrage, and the moral outrage prods us into acting, and in the kind of hunter-gatherer kind of forage groups of our past, that action could be anything from mockery to social distancing, all the way up to ostracization, and even execution. So gossip was the way that we policed and managed our groups. Gossip was like an incentive and reward system, incentive and punishment system, sorry, for keeping those groups functional. And that's why it's so important to human behavior. And if gossip was the reason for language evolving, that tells us that the kind of first stories really were gossipy stories. And indeed, when you look at stories, all really compelling stories have the essential elements of gossip in them. So they have heroes and villains. And importantly for us as storytellers, they inspire those emotions of wanting to celebrate heroes and punish villains. So as this guy, Professor William Flesch, writes, we have explicitly evolved the ability to track and desire to track others and learn their stories precisely in order to punish the guilty and somewhat secondarily to reward the virtuous. We are moved to punish defectors even if they do not harm us, and to reward altruists even if their altruism doesn't benefit us. So back in the context of the forager tribe, all those tens of thousands of years ago, if we heard a story, a true life gossipy story about somebody, we'd feel moral outrage, and that moral outrage would motivate us to act. We wouldn't be satisfied until that person was kind of outed and punished. But when we're being told a fictional story, we still see that, experience that feeling of moral outrage towards the villain, and praise towards the altruist, towards the hero. But those very powerful emotions motivate us to keep turning the page, to keep watching the movie, until we're satisfied, until we see the hero being rewarded, until we see the villain being kind of punished. These are the kind of core emotions that make stories, and make stories really compulsive and entertaining and very emotional. And I think it's important to note, especially in the context of the kind of work that you do, that a villain doesn't necessarily have to be a human villain. A villain might be a disease. A villain might be a problem that's holding back the performance of a particular department. A villain is basically an obstacle. The original definition of the word Satan was an obstacle standing in the way of a goal, which I think is very important. So any kind of obstacle that's standing in the way of what the hero of the story wants counts as a villain. Doesn't necessarily have to be a human being. So moral outrage, gossip is a really kind of fundamental part of what makes stories, and what makes them sort of so extremely powerful. And another sort of fundamental quality that stories have to have is, our obstacles and goals. I mean, all living things have the ultimate goal of trying to survive, getting what they want out of the environment, and all living things, from amoebas upwards, have obstacles in the way of that survival and have to learn how to overcome those obstacles. As Professor Daniel Nettle here says, when an amoeba follows a chemical gradient to reach and then ingest some food, we might say that it is acting on its positive emotions. All sensate organisms have some kind of system for finding good things in the environment and going after them. And a suite of positive emotions is just positive human emotions, is just a highly developed system of this kind. So, one of the things that story is doing is teaching us how to survive in the world, teaching us how to get what we want out of the environment. Stories is historically been humanity's teacher. We haven't evolved to learn sums and study algorithms and things. We are storytellers, and historically stories the way that we've learned how the world works. And so learning how the world works always involves an obstacle and a goal. A story should always have somebody wants something. As Aaron Sorkin says here, the very famous screenwriter, somebody's got to want something, and something's got to be standing in their way of getting it. And this very much echoes the sentiments of this 19th century theatre critic Ferdinand Brunetière, who says, what we ask of theatre is the spectacle of a will striving towards a goal. When somebody wants something and something standing in their way of getting it, we immediately become interested, because the human brain, the storytelling brain, is very much wired to be interested in how to get what we want from the world. And you can see that here. Here's just a quick example from Anton Chekhov's short novel 3 Years. This is the first paragraph. It was dark, and already lights had begun to gleam here and there in the houses, and a pale moon was rising behind the barracks at the end of the street. Laptev, our hero, was sitting on a bench by the gate, waiting for the end of the evening service at the Church of St. Peter and Paul. He was reckoning that Yulia Serviena would pass by on her way from the service, and then he would speak to her and perhaps spend the whole evening with her. So there we go, already straight away, no mucking around from Chekhov there. You've got a hero, you've got a goal, which is the hand, the love of Yulia. And because this is a story, it's already implied there's going to be some obstacles in the way of Laptev getting what he wants. And if you're not familiar with 3 Years, basically he does win the hand of Yulia, but it's a very one-sided relationship. He loves Yulia much more than Yulia loves him, and it's a story of this poor guy trying to negotiate this very kind of one-sided relationship. So huge obstacles in the way of his ultimate dream of this pure and proper love with Yulia. And that story, that's what storytellers have to do. We have to grab the attention of people straight away, and there's no better way, I don't think, of doing that than telling of an obstacle in the way of a goal. So obstacles and goals is our second, big takeaway from the science of storytelling. The third thing I want to talk about is identification. So sometimes storytellers mistakenly believe that their principal characters, their heroes, have to be likable. And so what you find is that very often stories have these very kind of bland, boring, kind of perfect, polished people at their center. And actually that's not correct. A hero in a story is flawed at the beginning of the story, and the story really narrates their learning about their flaws and overcoming their flaws in order to kind of help them get what they want. So what's much more important than being likable is that we identify with the main character of our story. So identification is hugely important. As the psychologist Elizabeth Pinnell says here, people seek out and gravitate towards evidence that others subjectively experience reality in the same way that they themselves do. Now, this is true in real life. We seek out friends and lovers and colleagues that we sense somehow experience that we sense they somehow experience reality in the same way that we do. And again, it goes back to that idea that we are a highly cooperative animal. We are very much like ants as much as we are like chimpanzees and bonobos. And so part of being highly cooperative is we're always looking for suitable cooperative partners. That's what a friend is. That's what a spouse is. That's what a colleague is. If they're successful cooperative partners. So subconsciously, we're always in this kind of what I call a detect and connect mode. We're detecting people who are like us in some way, and then when we feel they're like us in some way, we automatically want to connect with them. And so that's a really useful thing to know for storytellers. When we're trying to appeal to a certain group of people, that we present them with a hero, with a main character that they identify with. And we can achieve this in various different ways. We obviously identify with people who have similar identities to us, and that can be any kind of identity. We are drawn to people who have similar values and beliefs to us. So, political values, social values, beliefs about the world. Two people that believe in angels we'll probably hit it off, sitting in the waiting room with their GPs, that kind of thing. And I think a really important one, and some of the sort of forms of identification that make some of the best stories are about struggles and goals. I find when I'm reading a story and it's about a character who has similar struggles that I do, who has similar goals that I do, you find you very powerfully identify with people who have similar struggles and goals to you. And of course, that's because subconsciously, one of the reasons we use storytelling, we're drawn to it, is because it's a kind of a simulator for life. We want to find out, how do I solve these problems in my own life? So if a character in a story has similar problems to us, we tend to experience a very powerful form of identification. And there's another way we can, a sort of classic archetypal way that we can identify with a character. I'm going to show you just a short clip from this very old ITN interview with J.K. Rowling, author of Harry Potter, one of the most successful storytellers in history. And they were interviewing her. She was unknown at the time, about her brand new book about the wizard.
So had Harry Potter existed in your head for some time before?
Harry Potter came to me on a train in 1990. I was sitting just staring out of the window, and the idea just fell out of nowhere. It was the purest stroke of inspiration I've ever had in my life. And I've been writing about him ever since. Literally, I have boxes, loads of stuff on him. But has travelled with me to Portugal, where I was working before Edinburgh, back to Edinburgh, slowly growing and growing. But it was in Edinburgh that I actually kind of carved a book out of that mass of material.
Okay, but that single idea was what?
The single idea was Harry, this boy who didn't know he was a wizard, who for 11 years had made very odd stuff happen, that there was plainly mystery about him, but he didn't know what it was, and that then he got the letter that told him he had a place at wizard school. So
what J.K. Rowling is describing here is the classic underdog. Harry Potter was this orphan boy, lived under the stairs, but he's full of, so it's very low status, but he's full of latent power. And there's basically three rules to the underdog. So firstly, the obstacles standing in the way of the goals, they seem more powerful than the characters themselves. So very powerful obstacles in the way of their goals. The second rule of the underdog is that they are deserving of future success. They're flawed, but there's something about them which makes us feel that they're worthy of winning. They have inherent talents or insights to make them worthy of a happy ending. And finally, they are ultimately optimistic. I mean, often in storytelling, not straight away. Sometimes there's what storytellers known as the refusal of the call at the beginning of a story.
It's a demo that's shite.
Oh, I'll give you a quick update from yesterday.
Oh.
So there's been a big push.
I think we've got someone on with their mic on. Sorry, if we just keep an eye on if you've got background noise. Sorry, Will.
That's all right. I'll crack on. So ultimately, they're optimistic. The underdogs are going to win one day. So they might refuse the call of the goal at the beginning of the story, but ultimately they're optimistic. They fight through. And so the reason the underdog is so highly identifiable is because that's how most of us feel most of the time. Unless you're suffering from something like narcissistic personality disorder, you tend to believe that you experience your life as one of, obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. We tend to believe that we are deserving of success if we're mentally healthy and we're not, suffering from depression. We tend to be kind of quite optimistic about our own futures. So the underdog is very identifiable because the underdog is how most of the people feel most of the time. So that's a really good sort of tip for storytellers from the science of what's called shared reality. Right, and so just to start closing things out, I want to talk about how to structure our stories. So we've learned that stories should have the kind of basic elements of gossip, heroes and villains, moral outrage, feeling of praise, wanting to praise and reward the hero. We've learned that stories should be focused on obstacles and goals. We've learned that we ought to identify with the main character of a story somehow. We've got to feel that they experience the world in the same way that we do, and they're probably going to be some form of an underdog. So how are we going to put all that together into a coherent story? Well, there's basically two rules of story structure from the sciences of the mind. The first one is that one scene should cause the next scene, which should cause the next scene, which should cause the next scene. So this guy, George Saunders, is a very celebrated author from America who also teaches storytelling. And he writes that I've worked with so many wildly talented young writers over the years that I feel qualified to say that there are two things that separate writers who go on to publish from those who don't. First, a willingness to revise. And the second is the extent to which the writer has learnt to make causality. That's really all a story is. A series of things that happen in sequence in which we can discern a pattern of causality. So storytelling doesn't really work as what they call and then storytelling. You've got these kind of disjointed scenes. You see one scene and then another scene and then another scene, and you can't figure out how they connect. Whereas in good storytelling and compelling storytelling, the first scene action triggers the next scene, which triggers the next scene, which triggers the next scene. And that's because that's how our brains understand the world. So humans are, uniquely good at telling causal stories about events in the world. And the very famous late psychologist Professor Daniel Kahneman invites you just a quick study, a quick test of this. Invites you to look at this word. And then this word, bananas and vomit, bananas and vomit, bananas and vomit. And this is what he says happens in your subconscious mind. There was no particular reason to do so, but your mind automatically assumed a temporal sequence and a causal connection between the words bananas and vomit, forming a sketchy scenario in which bananas cause the sickness. So, it's a fundamental part of how our brains understand the world, and more importantly, tell stories about the world. Brains are constantly scanning our environment or the chaos in the environment and telling causal stories about them, even when those causal stories don't really exist. And indeed, this is one of the things that happens with patients who sadly become psychotic, is the causal properties of the brain go haywire, and they start seeing causal patterns in stuff that really doesn't exist. This poor woman, I'm going to show you a clip of this poor woman who is suffering from psychosis. She turned up, she had a date with someone and ended up sending them, I think it was 49,000 text messages before turning up at this poor guy's house with a knife. Anyway, but this is a quick interview with her, and you can see how she's rationalizing her behavior towards this poor guy, and it is, she's making these causal connections where there are none to be made.
And Isaac texted me and he says, "Have you ever been to Arizona?" And I was like, "This is really weird. I just decided to come here." And I said, "I'm not going to meet him unless God throws it in my face." So we start talking. I was like, "I'm not going to go there." Then he told me he has my same birthday. So I was like, okay, I have to go meet him because I told God that's what I would do. So I go meet him, and we have the same birthday. Our brothers are both named Jacob and David. Our fathers are both Egyptian Jews from Cairo. We're both vegetarians. Then I find out he does stuff with the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea has 33% salt in it. Walt Disney's club is called Club 33. The reason they're called this is because the location of Atlantis is inside the earth. The coordinates are 3333. It's the soul of the earth.
Jackie, can I get you to respond to some of the charges against you?
Oh,
Did you break into his home?
Yeah, quite sad, but it's also it's very interesting, isn't it? How when you can see it's this storytelling capacities of the mind that tend to go wrong in a similar way that in depressed patients, the storytelling capacity that makes somebody feel like a successful underdog, like they're optimistic, like that they can overcome the challenges of the world. That fails in depressed patients when they feel that that they're overwhelmed by the world, and actually all they can really want to do is retreat to the kind of back of the cave and protect themselves from it. So that's causality. It's a very important part of story structure, and without causality, story becomes very hard to focus on. People's attention starts to wander very quickly. And the final real takeaway is this: is the basic kind of three acts of story: crisis, struggle, and resolution. And there's usually often a takeaway lesson from a story that becomes clear in that final act. Psychologists find that we store memories in this form, beginning and end with a turning point in the middle. We expect kind of, when we are swapping gossipy stories, it tends to come these three acts of something happened. There was a middle stage where the character wrestled with this thing happening, and then there was a resolution. That, we discover in the resolution whether they won or they lost. Are they a good guy or a bad guy, or whatever it might be. So these three acts is the basic form of all. Well, I wouldn't say all, of most storytelling. And I'm going to show another little clip here. This is actually an advert, but it kind of sums up those three acts really well. This is an advert from the 1960s. for an insulation company. That is an advert that wouldn't be made today. But it's a really nice example of this kind of causal 3-act storytelling.
This one's not got the sound coming through well. I don't know if it's
Not much to look at. Just a layer of paper, a layer of foil, layer of paper, and so on. As thick or as thin as you need it. But when it comes to keeping something cold or hot, or keeping something from getting cold or hot, it's 25 to 100 times better than anything we've had before. 1 inch of super insulation wrapped around a railroad tank car can keep liquid helium at 420 degrees below zero, all the way from New York to Los Angeles. A half inch of it can be 2,000 degrees hot on one side and cool to the touch on the other. Tell you what, you could put a super insulated container of coffee in your freezer, take it out a month later, and it would still be hot. If you don't think it's as good as we say it is, watch the birdie.
There you go. So that's a classic example of 3-act storytelling. You'll also note that it's causal. You'll also note that it has an obstacle and a goal. You know, the bird wants to survive. The bird's also an underdog. You know, you think when it goes into that boiling water that its obstacles are more powerful than itself. So it has the basic outlines of the underdog too. And also, we want the bird to win. We feel sorry for the bird, So and the villain in that piece, you could say, was the boiling water. That was the antagonist, you'll probably feel emotional on behalf of that bird when it goes in the boiling water, and that's what keeps you watching. So even in that very simple little advert there from the 60s, you see all the basic elements of successful storytelling. And you see it in all kinds of storytelling. Just to finish off, this is something as simple as a Mr. Man story. This is Mr. Nosy. So Mr. Nosy, when we meet him, he's a flawed character. He's ostracized. We learn by all the villagers. And no one likes him. And they don't like him because he's nosy. He's always sticking his nose into people's business. And then the neighbours conspire. So you see how causal this is. This causes the neighbours to conspire, which causes them to act. They put a clothes peg on his nose. This causes him to reflect. And he goes off on his own and he changes and he's transformed. And the story ends. The resolution is the hero's rewarded. Everybody in, I think it's Tiddletown, becomes the best friend of his. They will love him now. So he's rewarded with status and connection and love and community. So even in a story as simple as Mr. Nosy, we see these kind of basic elements of classic storytelling. And that is the end of the masterclass this morning. So yeah.
Thank you, Will. I just think some of this stuff is so fascinating, and if I can try and I've got a few questions, so don't worry if there's not one. Oh, and Hannah, I will come to you first. Brilliant. But I think I'll just say I think that the question for us we're trying to work out is how transferable is some of this to your working life, I suppose, or personal life in general. You just got me thinking about children's stories. Yeah, it's really obvious as I go through these again of Elliot, the ones that I can dive into, these sort of morality tales, like Mr. Nosy, or even like the hungry caterpillar. So we could do a bit on that. Why exactly is the hungry caterpillar so hungry? And you kind of anthropomorphize these characters, don't you? Versus the ones where it's just events and nothing's happening. It's really obvious. So thinking about that stuff in terms of I'm starting a new role or I'm leading a change program and I'm gonna have to talk about it to all these people. How do I want it to come across? So I'll not hog the Will's time. I was That's not a question. Let me just check Hannah. Hannah, did you have a question? Did you want to come in?
Sorry, I was trying to react. I thought it was a really great session, but I don't have a question. Sorry.
Well, can I ask you? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna pounce on you slightly. Can I just ask you? Do you think it's easy to tell stories?
You asking me?
No, Hannah, if you don't mind. Do
All
you
right.
think, and I'll turn to you,
Sorry.
Will. Do you think it's something which comes naturally to people?
I don't think it does. I think when you're not in the workplace and you're with friends and you're with people that you trust, I think it does come really naturally. I'm reflecting on some of the things that I do in my role and where stories could have more of an impact. And I think, I think we do sort of in the workplace shy away from storytelling, um, where it could have huge impact.
Brilliant. Well, that's a good segue from I will ask a question to Eldan, which is along those lines, which is because I meet people who will say, I'm not a creative person. And we do exercises, some of the work we do, and it turns out they are. If you're someone without a background in, say, the arts, if you've not been writing plays your whole life, you don't feel a naturally creative person. Where would you start with some of this? Could you give some advice about just how to maybe quite a small thing almost and being practical? How would you start to use storytelling?
Yeah,
Well,
so I think I agree with what Hannah was saying. I think we are naturally good storytellers as human beings. We've been evolving this way for a long time. But I think that when we're in a social environment, we find it quite easy, and I think that's often because in the social environment we are gossiping. Even if it's about ourselves, they're the kind of gossipy stories. I had this thing happen to me; it's hilarious. You wouldn't believe it. When we're in that mode, we tend to be naturally really good storytellers. But it's when we try to apply that to a kind of work context, we start to kind of sort of doubt that quite a bit, and we tend to do that thing of thinking that we need to communicate facts. So so we start listing sort of lots of facts, a bit like a Wikipedia page, and that kind of kills the story a little bit. So yeah, just to kind of agree with what Hannah was saying there, really, and I think sort of beginning in terms of kind of working on our storytelling, I think a good way is to actually do that kind of orally rather than writing stuff down. That's how we've been telling stories for much longer than we've been writing them down is by telling them to each other, and that's a really good way of figuring out what parts of our story people are responding emotionally to, what's keeping their attention, what's not keeping their attention, what's making them laugh, what's making them go shock horror face. So I think that's a really good place to start is by practicing your storytelling in company with other people.
yeah, I think that's because the exercise we're saying write something. I don't think you have to write a manuscript. I don't think that's the way to start. I think you can arrive at a few kind of points of interest and a general structure, and then really think what's the real message you're trying to get across, and then you might tell it slightly differently.
That's
time.
it, and I think actually it's better to just write down bullet points, structural bullet points. So these are the kind of 5 or 6 beats I want to hit in this order. Because I think if you're going to be writing your story down word for word and then talking it, you're gonna lose a lot of that kind of instinctual talent that you have for making the story work and be kind of fluid and dynamic with it.
Brilliant. Can I go to look and see a few people raising hands? Brilliant. Bex, can I come to you first? Hello, Bex. How are you?
Hi, good, thanks. Yeah, thanks very much for that, Will. That was really interesting and really engaging. Kind of linking to what's been asked already, nicely, I think. How do you think all this changes when the communication style changes? So I look predominantly at like social media and like how we can make more of an impact in our storytelling and the work that we do to engage with more service users. Do you think that kind of like crisis struggle resolution is less or more, or does that change at all when the medium of how you're communicating changes?
I think something as fundamental as crisis struggle resolution doesn't actually change. I think with social media, it's just got to be really quick. You know, as you all know all too well, you've got to grab attention really, really quickly. But the way that you do that is with that kind of crisis in inverted commas, like this is what I'm here to do. This is my goal. This is my obstacle. Bang! You know, you don't muck about. You go straight into it, and that's how you grab their attention. And then in that kind of causal way, kind of wrestling with the ramification, whatever that is. Here I am on my journey. Here I am, you know, struggling with whatever challenge I've given myself. And then, you know, it has to have that resolution too. It has to have that end point where you're saying, okay, I know I've achieved or I've not achieved, and this is what I've learned. So that those three acts are just sort of, they're how we think. They're how we experience our own lives. So I don't think they change very much, if at all, with a different medium. But I do think that social media, you have to be really efficient and you have to really grab attention really, really quickly.
Thank you. Kev, good morning, Kev.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I'd just like to ask, Will, so I've read your book, The Status Game, and I think it's a really insightful book. And I was just wondering how we could potentially weave some of that status narrative into the story around public sector as employers, because obviously we all have the challenge of recruiting the best and brightest and retaining people, because I think over time the story around public sector work has changed, where it was very much a job for life. There was a lot of altruistic status gain from working in the public sector and being a public servant, to where now it's probably not seen in the same light, and it's probably seen as, you know, quite hard work, a lot of real challenges, and just not as appealing to people. So it would be great to hear your thoughts on how we could potentially use storytelling to make public sector an employer of choice again.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Kevin, and thank you for reading The Status Game. So for everybody else who's not read it, so in The Status Game, I argue that there are kind of different forms of status, and there's basically three ways that humans try to get status from the world, which is something that we need to be psychologically well or even physically healthy. People need to feel that they have kind of the respect of their peers. The first one is sort of dominance, so it's pushing people around, so we don't really like that one. And then the other two are virtue and success. So virtue is we want to be seen as good people and as doing something good and meaningful in the world. And then there's success. We want to be seen as kind of competent, you know, highly competent and, you know, good at what we do and useful to other people. So in answer to your question, I mean, you know, it might need a bit more considered thought, but my immediate instinct would be to try and reinvigorate that sense that public sector work is kind of virtuous in that way, that yes, it's going to be, you know, hard, and yes, you're going to have struggles, but that hardness and those struggles are going to give your life meaning. And the meaning is that you are, you know, giving your life over to helping people and to maximizing the good that you're doing to other people. So I really think that kind of focusing on that and trying to reinvigorate that is the best way. I think, you know, one of the things about storytelling is that I always say it's not like a magic spell. You can't brainwash people with it, really. You've got to be kind of authentic. So there's no point trying to pretend that you're going to become rich working in the public sector. So don't shy away from that. You know, one of my favorite kind of ads that I've seen recently was for Open University. And it showed lots of people kind of, you know, mostly working people, family people, you know, working on their degrees in their spare time. And one of the great things about that ad was that they didn't shy away from showing it was going to be difficult. So in the middle of the ad, they had people throwing down their pens and giving up, And then when they get their degrees at the end of the ad, you feel such elation. You feel so wonderful, even though this is you're going to be watching this thing for like 2 minutes. It's a really emotional piece of filmmaking. It's really wonderful. So I love the fact that they didn't shy away from saying this is going to be hard. And when you're studying for Open University degree, the obstacles are high. And so that's another thing that I would suggest with public sector work is to not shy away from that. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, there's going to be struggles, but my God, those struggles are going to give your life enormous meaning, and they're going to make they're going to mean that your daily work matters enormously to the happiness and well-being to a large number of people. And that's ultimately what we want in the world. I mean, I know that there are a band of people that all they want to be is rich, but I don't think that's most people. I think what most people want to do is to feel that they are contributing to the human family in some way, and that's certainly something that private sector work offers people who work in it.
Thank you. Should we go to John next? Hello, John.
Hi. Thanks, Will. Thanks, Andrew. So I think for me, I'm just thinking about my own sort of perspective and positioning. I think if I look at the 3 Ps, I think personal, political, professional. I think of the personal is my story. I'm an expert in my own story of identity and diversity. As a black man who identifies as with a dual heritage identity, talking about myself has become much better, easier. From a story of shame and trauma as a young man, as a child and young man. So coming to hear the workshop, it just gives me more strength and conviction to keep going with my own story, because my story, I think, helps people to resonate and reflect on their own sort of journeys. I do a lot of work with young people who are in care. That's my professional bit. And again, the villain idea of and heroes. Most of my young people would be termed as villains in their risky behaviours, offending, all the rest of it, which comes with care leavers who are young people, have been dealt really bad cards in their lives. So the idea of reframing that is really healthy. It's really encouraging. So the political bit is around, pulling people together, connecting, building communities, and the courage in all that we do in those different areas of life, really. So I guess I'm saying storytelling, for me, it's context in where you are, in your life, personally, job, relationships, all those key areas of who we are. But I think for focusing on the work that I do with young people, the idea of, my young people are assessed to the 100th degree, and recordings are stuff which we do in everyday work with our young people. But, sort of reframing that, bringing in the young person's voice as their story, I think is really, really healthy. And, I'd like to think when my young person would ever want to read their file, but it sounds like it's been the young person's voice is in there, and they're able to be part of decision making, part of choices, part of any successes in there, and that's something which I really hold dearly. So thank you for giving me more strength and giving me more conviction from so far, from what I've heard. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks for sharing that. I admit, you made me think. I hadn't thought about this from the point of view of your personal story about things that matter to you, and so it's so yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And then there's the second half of what you were talking about. The second half of this session is me trying to ask questions about, as organisations, can we capture stories from people, young people that aren't just about assessments, but are important things that reflect what the what the organisation wants to do, or what's most important about humans. So thank you for that. Should we go to Vince next? Hello, Vince. Good morning.
I'm sorry. Thanks, Yep. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Just really thanks, Will, for presenting that. Really, really amazing, and kind of is relevant in a way. I was invited to a team celebration day on Monday with a group of locality social workers, and several of them came up and kind of told a story. And I bet you if you said, "Oh, you're doing storytelling," they probably wouldn't identify that. They just kind of identify, this is what I do, and this is something that particularly resonated with me. And for me, it was like, wow, there's some untapped power in that, in terms of Kevin's point around status, around if you looked at what those individual stories told and how important they were to the individual, but more importantly, equal importance, how much they meant to the actual person telling the story and their involvement in it. So I think really untapped potential with that, I suppose, is the comment. And I guess the other thing I'm seeing more and more of, and it's welcome, and Andrew touched on it, we're moving away from saying we're going to assess someone. We want to go and assess them. We want them to tell us their story. And I think there's still a ways to go, but I think the more progressive leaning of us will be kind of challenging that and making sure that that's the language. And there was a great thing put out, I think it was Baswa or someone did it, around, how we talk as professionals, and if you did that in your personal life, it would just sound ridiculous. So something about that kind of is kind of John was saying, that very common story that people have is really important, and I just think it's fascinating. And look, I'm going to go and check out your book that Kevin referenced. Sounds good.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Vincent. Yeah.
I've got thank you. I've got a question that I've been thinking about as we've been talking, which is, so when this is a reflection about myself, right, in trying to apply storytelling, which is a concern that what I end up doing is developing like long anecdotes, which I think are interesting stories, right? But they maybe meander a little bit, and people are politely listening to me. So how do you know if you're telling an evocative story with an audience that you're really connecting with? So that question is, on one hand, avoid being boring, but it's also, is storytelling a two-way process? It's not story writing, storytelling.
Well, it is if you're, and that's fine if you're presenting your story, orally to somebody, because you can get that instant feedback. But of course, often we're not doing that. So I think one of the really important things that I teach is that discipline when you're telling a story, to keep on the point. If you ever hear yourself in your head saying, I digress. No, you can't. You don't digress. At the moment you digress, I promise you, people's thoughts are wandering. So you set your story up. You've got your character, you've got the obstacles, and you've got their goals, and everything that you tell after that really should be pertaining to the to the obstacle and the goals. You're not writing Ulysses. If you're trying to keep people's attention, you've got to have that discipline and that focus to keep your story on the point, on the obstacle, on the goal, on the central characters, and don't be tempted to go off in these kind of flights of fancy. And that's why I kind of like that. Read that Chekhov paragraph too, because it just shows you that even 200 years ago, he's straight on the point. There's no mucking around. You're straight in there with, here's a dude, he loves her, and he's sitting at a church waiting for her. There's no mucking about there. So and that's why Chekhov is still highly regarded. I mean, the writers team for The Sopranos, one of the to get in the writers team for The Sopranos, you had to have read Chekhov. So he's still very respected, and I think a lot of it is because he has that discipline of not going off on these kind of endless meanders.
Can I related to that then a bit, then just stuff that's in the book and the Chekhov point. In the book you talk a lot about the importance of change, and it's like the first lines of books, and there's things like from spot that Spot the dog. I'm assuming,
Yeah.
assuming people know Spot the dog. That Spot, he hasn't eaten his supper. Where can he be? And even political writing, like a spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism, or Harry Potter, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley, number 4 Privet Drive. We're proud to say they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. And the book says a lot about how these are all kind of, they're anticipating a change, or they're describing a change that has happened, and that's a thing which is like it's teasing your taste buds as the audience. It's something we're naturally interested in knowing about. So do you think how important are, sorry if I've sort of quite within the full bits of the book,
they're just sort of making the same point as the Chekhov thing, really, is that you've got to get straight in there. And you know, I think there's a temptation when people are sitting back going, oh, I'm a storyteller now, that they can get all self-indulgent. But I like those. The reason I've picked those first sentences is because they're anything but self-indulgent. They're respecting the reader and the value of the reader's attention enough, where straight in with the first sentence, they're telling you immediately, this is what's going on in the world. I mean, my favourite first sentence is probably from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, which is, Marley was dead to begin with. And it's like, what? He was dead to begin with, you know. So like even in that first sentence, bang, you know, Charles Dickens is working really hard to grab your attention, you know, and it signals to you subconsciously this is going to be a good story because I'm being respected. You know, I'm not being. This isn't an exercise in the reader's in the writer's ego. This is the writer really working hard to capture my attention and entertain me. So yeah, I think going straight in there with those moments of change or signals that really significant changes are going to come for the central character is a really good discipline.
Can I just ask a final question about and I'll just say, sorry, before I say that, I'll say, let me check the chat and I'm not missing anyone off. Oh, there's a question about painting the villain here, so that might be a good one. I was going to ask about characters, just to, like, how to make characters evocative. I came across an exercise once that was about Star Wars, and the test was describe these characters without saying their job, you know, their name. And for the original Star Wars, so Han Solo, it was just blindingly obvious and easy how to do that. That he's a raconteur, he's you know, questionable attitude towards women, he's got a heart of gold, all that stuff. And then it was do the same thing with the more recent ones. I don't even know the names of the characters in the more, you know, and they were just like the answers were, well, he's a man, he's got a thing to do, and it was just like really clear. For some reason, the first thing gets character absolutely right, and of course you can do that with Han Solo and Princess Leia and the rest of them. So can you tell us a little bit about character and thoughts on maybe villains? What makes a good villain? That might be a good.
Yeah, so that's, I know that's a great exercise. It really does sort of to capture what's great about the early Star Wars that perhaps wasn't so great about the later Star Wars. And I think that's right. I mean, you know, in the science of storytelling, and in my latest book, A Story is a Deal, I write about this too. But A Story is a Deal is much more about you know, leadership and motivation, all this kind of stuff. And in A Story is a Deal, I write about politics and politicians, the most successful politicians, and you know, people like you know, Barack Obama, Hope, Tony Blair, New Labour, New Britain. You know, Thatcher was tough. Trump, you know, for all the things we think about Trump, it's very clear who he is. And I think these are our, you know, in fiction, but also in real life, these are our most successful characters. You can sum them up very clearly who they are. So I think that specificity is really important. And obviously in the science of storytelling, I write about how critical it is to very clearly define your character, ideally in one sentence. You know, what they stand for, what their belief is about the world, and how they get what they want. I don't actually think there's any kind of different science, particularly for, you know, for villains. I think if you're a novelist and you're writing, the one thing I would say about villains is don't make them three-dimensional. I think if you're making really good storytelling, it's very tempting to take somebody that we might not like very much, like a Trumpish character perhaps, and make them a caricature of, you know, misogyny and racism and sexism and stuff. And I think that for me, that's just a bit cheap. I think dehumanizing people because we don't agree with their political philosophy is more propaganda than it is storytelling. I think the best storytelling sincerely tries to see the world from the antagonist's kind of point of view and presents that. And that to me is what makes great art, is when you get these clash of very sophisticated and sincere worldviews. It's much more meaningful than kind of this comic strip of perfect heroes and perfectly villainous villains.
Thank you. I might ask you to conclude with a few comments on almost a celebration of the power of stories and film and literature, because I saw a comment in the chat. So I think this is a good example of storytelling, what we're doing. But Dilys, what you put in the chat, it sort of threw me. I think that's such a powerful thing about this. You mentioned there visiting HMP Manchester and a group of men that were queuing to hear storytelling in the library, and thinking perhaps this is something they haven't experienced as children. Obviously, I've been talking about my son and taking for granted quite nice experiences reading and Spot the Dog. So yeah, I think that's a really important. Thank you for sharing that. So the conclusion to this, writing about just how storytelling for many of us is something which is handed down through generations and feels like a really important part of the human experience. So I wanted to draw attention to that comment because I think it's fantastic. And then maybe, Will, what do you think about that? And can you perhaps end on a crescendo of aren't stories brilliant?
Yeah. I mean, like in my spare time, I'm lucky enough to be a Samaritans volunteer. So, when John was talking about the young people, the troubled young people that he works with, I was thinking about that, and one of the things you learn as a Samaritans volunteer, like when you join the Samaritans, like part of you thinks, you're told, oh, you're not allowed to talk about yourself, you're not allowed to give opinions or advice. So you think, well, what are we here for? And the answer is that we're here to hear people's stories. And when people phone the Samaritans, what they tend to want is just somebody to actually listen to them, actually listen to their story, to hear what they're saying. And even that is this, it's an extremely powerful thing when you get a successful call of the Samaritans. You realize how utterly kind of critical it is that people from all walks of life, especially people in pain, have their stories heard. And I think, especially people who are working in some of the areas that you're working in, I think it's a really important thing to remember. And also, story is literally how we change the world. Story is how we make the world a better place. Hearing other people's stories is how we get to learn empathy and understanding and break down some of these terrible tribal walls that have just been building more and more and more, especially since the advent of social media. So people often think about storytelling as a kind of a bit of a fad, really, but it isn't a fad. It's it's what we've been doing since we became human, and it's really a skill that we should learn if we want to make the world in any way a better place. So I wish you all the best of luck in your storytelling endeavours.
Thank you, Will. Can I say a big thank you from everyone on the call? Because I think I've had people WhatsApp me in the background saying this is fantastic, and I'm really pleased to have got Chekhov into a masterclass. We don't know if we do Dostoevsky next year, but I'm going to keep at it. But one of the strengths of the masterclass, I think we have such interesting different types of thinkers and giving people opportunity to just look at something a different way. So I really appreciate having you here, Will. Thank you very much. If you want to pop off now. Hopefully we'll see you again.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me, Andrew, and good luck, everybody. Great to be here this morning. Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.